Frazioni Panis. Stevie Christie. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. Your family, today's holy sacrifice of the Mass of Easter Monday and the infinite grace which flows forth from it, specifically is offered for Harold Oglesby and his wife Ruth Ann at the request of Tom Oglesby, their devoted and faithful son. Let's also lift up Jared Miller specifically for proper gainful employment. Let's also pray for Kim of the Coalition for Cancel Priests. Oh, she's a steadfast warrior for the priests. For the benefactors of the Coalition for Cancel Priests, especially those in our monthly prayer requests. And for the repose of the soul of Irka, for the healing of Orville Good, and for David Ludovici. This is pondering this all today. I think the good news about all these requests is this. Every canceled priest exiled by his bishop is a minister of grace, ordained by God himself, and is, in fact, a priest forever in the line of Melchizedek, ordained to be a minister of God's grace. And there are a ton of people for whom to share the infinite grace, with whom to share the infinite grace of every holy sacrifice of the Mass. So neither I nor any exiled canceled priest is lacking in job security. It's one of, Hermit David, God bless him. He suffers so much as people who are shepherds, true shepherds, good shepherds, faithful shepherds, as those do. But as I said before, he's the one that's really inspiring me, encouraging me, urging me to be the minister of grace I'm supposed to be. So thank you, Hermit David. There's another group of people not lacking in job security. Many bishops also will not be lacking in job security, shoveling coals, stoking the fires of hell. That's just fact. Don't take my word for it. So many visionaries, so many saints. Oh, yes. And we don't need some high authority telling us so. We're going to get to that in the end. Well, dear family, today is the profound, true gospel account of the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. And immediately, my mind raced to that historical research I did, it was quite some time ago, about Cleopas, one of those two disciples, the one who's specifically named. And I remembered what I wondered back then, why Jesus would choose those two, to whom he would just, when you just envision it, he just catches up to them, saunters up to them for a little chit-chat. Hey, guys, how would it look like it? He's not, listen, if Jesus ever comes to speak to you, he's not going to speak to you like you would expect a Thomas Aquinas doctoral dissertation. Because we couldn't even comprehend it. He couldn't understand it. We're not sharp. We don't have the gifts of Thomas Aquinas. He's going to speak to us in the language that we will understand. So he comes up to these two. What's happening? What's going on? Why do you look so sad? So now remember the summary of this research I did about Cleopas, which answers the question, why would Jesus meet up with them? It is the Cleopas from the road to Emmaus who was Saint Joseph's brother. The Saint Joseph, who is betrothed to the Virgin Mary, the foster father, caregiver of, I like to say, instead of caregiver of Jesus, I like to say caregiver of the Holy Eucharist. it helps cement in our mind who Jesus is and where we can find him in the breaking of the bread, as they did. We're about to hear that. So anyways, we have Cleopas, brother of Saint Joseph, who was betrothed to the Virgin Mary. And this same Cleopas was married to the Mary, who stood beside the Virgin Mary at the foot of the cross. This means that Cleopas and Mary were the uncle and aunt of Jesus crucified. I remember when I first did this research, and it just blows me away today as it did then. And then adding to these astounding relationships and loyalty to Jesus, Cleopas and Mary Cleopas were the parents of both St. James the Less, the first bishop of Jerusalem, and St. Simeon, the second bishop of Jerusalem. I think that's what got me going on all this, was I was wondering, who the heck is this St. Simeon? Because I thought it was the guy that was in the temple when they came for the presentation. And that's when I discovered, no, they were talking about somebody entirely different. And then I studied the genealogy. But it means that St. James the Less and St. Simeon were first cousins of Jesus. I can't imagine it. There's one more stunning fact about Cleopas and Mary and St. James the Less and St. Simeon. According to the surviving fragments of the work Exposition of the Sayings of the Lord of the Apostle Father Papias of Hierapolis, who lived circa 70 to 163 AD, so the same time as the apostles. Mary, the wife of Cleopas, would be the mother of Judas, the brother of Jesus. That's what they called cousins back then, brothers. That's what the Prots don't understand, the stupid ones that say, oh, Mary had more children. No, she didn't. Stupid Prots. Anyway, just get angry. Papias identifies with Thaddeus, Jude, as with Thaddeus. In other words, the apostle Jude Thaddeus, which means for us, Cleopas, brother of St. Joseph, and his wife Mary of Cleopas were the parents of St. James the Less, apostle, bishop, and martyr, St. Simeon, bishop and martyr, and St. Jude Thaddeus, apostle and martyr. Which brings us back to today's gospel and the fact that Jesus chose, and this answers the question, to meet up with his uncle and explain to his uncle the truths of sacred scripture. And then Cleopas and his companion, at this point, they still did not recognize Jesus until that particular moment when, well, let's hear it in the words of Cleopas, spoken to the 11 back in Jerusalem. And rising up the same hour, they went back to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 gathered together, and those who were staying with him. Now here, before I continue on, something occurred to me while I was reading the gospel. Remember I said, every single time you read it, something might show up, might pop out. You might see something for the first time. And what I thought was, we heard it. He recognized Jesus in the breaking of the bread. This is like, 3 days after Holy Thursday, which was the one and only time Jesus blessed the bread, broke it, and gave it to his disciples, saying, take this, all of you, and eat it. Which tells us, which I never realized for the first time, he must have been there at the Last Supper. And we knew it wasn't just the 11, but one of the additional people had to have been him, because that's how he recognized Jesus. All of a sudden before him, he sees the Last Supper connected to what's going on right before his very eyes, and he recognizes Jesus, whereupon Jesus vanishes. He recognized him in the breaking of the bread, which then got me to thinking as I'm preparing this, well, that's what we're supposed to do. Recognize him. But how many people do not? How many popes, cardinals, bishops, and priests do not? Because if they recognize that's really Jesus, let me tell you, they'd be treating him a lot differently. I'm not just saying stupid things. When I say they don't recognize Jesus in the Blessed Sacrament, in the Holy Eucharist, in the host, which, by the way, I was going to tell you a definition of host, which is what it really meant was, I want to get it exactly right, so I don't want to set the wrong, but remind me to tell you the definition of host. And it's something like sacrificial victim, something like that. It's profound. I mean, we always just call, this is the host. We have no idea what we're even saying. Anyway, back to the gospel. Rising up the same hour, they went back to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 gathered together, and those that were staying with them, saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and hath appeared to Simon." And they told what things were done in the way, and how they knew him in the breaking of the bread. Remember how Mary Magdalene didn't know it was Jesus until he spoke her name and she realized who it was? And now Cleopas and another disciple didn't recognize Jesus until the breaking of the bread. Now, here's a spoiler alert, because I was going to actually talk about what follows in today's gospel, but I looked ahead, and sure enough, you're going to get it tomorrow anyway, but I'll give you a spoiler alert. Well, Cleopas is saying all this. The very next verse is all of a sudden Jesus is in their midst, in the upper room. And the 11, having just heard Cleopas, suddenly he appears in their midst, and they didn't recognize him either, and thought they were seeing some sort of a ghost, some sort of a spirit. So Jesus showed them the wounds in his hands and his feet, and they still did not believe it was him. So he sat down and he ate with them and said something like, you see, ghosts don't eat food. Really, it's a great idea to reread Luke chapter 24, because for 2,000 years, countless faithful have been martyred because of that chapter. I don't know how many countless. Only God knows. The number is so great, and the means so diabolical, because of what we just read in chapter 24. In fact, Cleopas, on the road to Emmaus, and his wife Mary there at the foot of the cross, had 3 sons who were martyred because of what we just read in Luke chapter 24. Which leads us to one simple point. Actually, I had 3. I ran out of time, but I'm going to give you the second one anyway. But here's the first one then. I am done with every modernist person who claims to be a Jew, who plays the anti-Semite card, when we faithfully, in faith, say Jesus Christ is King. I'm done. If they don't like it, tough. This is America. Get out. And don't steal any more Palestinian land while you're at it. Get out. At most, what is there, 70, 80 million of us in America? Afraid to say Jesus Christ is King because there's at most 8 million Jews, not in Israel, but scattered about the world. I don't know what they are here in the United States. They're not that many. What, 1.5 million maybe? And they've got 70, 80 million Catholics and God knows how many Christians afraid to say Christ is King. I'm done with the card. Christ is King, whether you like it or not. Listen, I don't complain about their holding tightly to some long-forgotten promise 4,000 years old to Abraham. Even though Jesus in John chapter 8 made it crystal clear they're not children of Abraham, but children of Satan. Crystal clear. Deny that. Get out of the Catholic Church because you're a liar, you're a fake, you're a fraud. They're children of Satan. If you don't like it, take it up with Jesus. Who am I going to believe? I'm going to believe the gospel of Jesus and the words right out of his mouth, or some stupid moron of a bishop, cardinal, or pope who says otherwise. Who am I going to listen when, as Cardinal Burke said to that other bishop once, when I die, I'm going to stand in judgment before Jesus, my King, not before you bishops, not before the USCCB. Jesus Christ is King. And if you don't like it, Jew, and you try to play that anti-Semitic card with me, watch out. I'm done. And every bishop should be done with it too. And every cardinal should be done with it too. And they should be defending the Catholic Church against that card. Get to that. Anyway, I don't complain about them holding tightly to that long forgotten promise, but I do think they have a screw loose. Because anyone with the brain, isn't that the screw loose is supposed to be in your brain? Is that where the screw is loose? Is that how it goes? The last 2,000 years of human history have proven to anyone who uses the brains in their head that the old covenant ended decisively on Calvary. Done. The old covenant is done. And if you have any doubts about that whatsoever, reread Luke chapter 24. Because right there in the middle, we kind of gloss over it as we read the gospel. We just go from one verse to the next, and we get to that cool line about they recognize him in the breaking of the bread. And it was only today for the first time that I connected. That meant they were there at the Last Supper. Reread the Gospels. Right there in the middle of today's gospel. Right there in the middle. You hear Cleopas, brother of Joseph, uncle of Jesus, husband of Mary, next to the Virgin Mary on the cross, and father of three martyrs, James, Les, Simeon, and Jude, state clearly and unequivocally. I mean, why I say all that? It's because when you're a lawyer, you're supposed to lay a foundation for your expert witness, right? Well, how can you say you're an expert in some forensic detail of a homicide? We'll talk about the crucifixion now. How can you say that? Well, because I've got a doctor in medicine and a specialty in, what's that called when they dissect? What's that called when they, autopsy. I've done 1,000 autopsies. So I can describe to you about this, that, or the other little fact that I'm trying to prove. I'm an expert in it. So if we're looking for an expert in the Catholic faith who can tell us what happened back then, well, I'm going to qualify Cleopas as an expert. Because, as I said, brother St. Joseph, uncle of Jesus, husband of Mary, next to the Virgin Mary at the cross, and father of three martyrs, James, Les, Simeon, and Jude. You don't get much better of an expert than that. And then let's throw in the fact that then Jesus chose to appear to him on the road to Emmaus. And well, they're on the road to Emmaus, and Jesus asks him that question about, well, what did happen in Jerusalem? Listen to what he says. Well, apart from first he says, are you the only person who doesn't know? And then he says this, Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in work and word before God and all the people, how our chief priests and princes delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. So I'm done with the Jews saying, you got a problem with me saying Jesus Christ is king, or we didn't do it. I mean, since Lent began, I've probably given you 6 examples from sacred scripture, from the Gospels, how they are specifically identified as exactly the people who did exactly that. Then had the audacity to say to Pilate, remember they threatened Pilate? Oh, you're no friend of Caesar. We have one king, and that's Caesar. Oh my gosh. We're going to get to that in just a second, about today's bishops, cardinals, and popes. Let his blood be on our head and on our children. They got their wish. They got what they asked for. So the Jews then crucified the Messiah, period. And if they dare to call themselves Jews now with some sort of attachment somehow, go figure how they got this, they dare to call themselves Jews now, at least they should have the integrity to own it. And you never hear the end of anti-Catholics ripping into the Catholic Church about, oh, you did the Inquisition. Never mind that people actually proclaimed heresy so that they could get sent over to the Inquisitional courts because the Inquisitional courts were so fair and let so many people go free. That's where they came up with defense attorneys. That's where they came up with the court reporter. That's where they came up with the grace period that we have like on our credit cards. The Inquisitional courts were so awesome that people committed heresy to get over there so that they weren't judged by the civil courts. But what do you hear from the prots, the anti-Catholic bigots? Where they talk about the Crusades, which were merely attempts to get back what was stolen from us by the Muslims. I am sick and tired of the Jews or anybody else bringing up Catholic history and then saying, that's your history. Listen, even if the Inquisition were true, the bad stuff about it, by the way, they've actually read the court records in the last, say half century. They've actually, or less than that, they've actually read the court records and discovered that the Catholic Church in Spain, I think it was something like 50, as in 50, were condemned. And then the church didn't do it themselves. The civil authorities did because they were such bad actors. There weren't 1 million people killed by the Inquisition. That's a myth created by the anti-Catholic Protestants. Remember after the Armada, or England Navy, beat the Armada, suddenly the Prots ruled the world, which meant they ruled the press. And that narrative, this narrative that the left-wing liberals come up with in our day and age is not something new. That's what they've been doing. That's what they always have done. Anyway, even if it were true, the Inquisition and the Crusades, the bad stuff that they try to put out there, is all anti-Catholic bigotry. Even if it were true, we could say, yeah, but that was 500 years ago. That was 700 years ago. Don't be blaming me for what was 500 and 700 years ago. Well, okay. Then if you're going to say that they're not to blame for killing Jesus, for crucifying Jesus, even though the gospel makes it crystal clear exactly who did it, if they're going to claim to be part of them, at least have the integrity to own it. If they expect us to own the Inquisition and the Crusades, which I readily and rightly do, because they were good things, contrary to the narrative, they should own the crucifixion, and they don't, which means they're not really Jews. I don't know what they are. We know, of course, they are not in the lineage of the Jews back then. They're a new group of people who adopted Judaism and are now, as the Jews did back then, using a 4,000-year-old words to Abraham as an excuse to seek to be Zionist rulers of the world. Remember what I said. You can take this to the bank. Who ruled the world back then? The Romans. Who did the Jews want the Messiah to do? What did they want the Messiah to do? To defeat the Romans. And what do you become if you defeat the ruler of the world? You become the ruler of the world, which in their mind, chosen people, that's what they were destined. They had a manifested destiny in their mind that they were supposed to be then as now. That's it in a nutshell. But they didn't want for the longest time for that deep, dark secret to get out, because you can do a lot more behind the scenes until you get that moment when you can put the fist down. But if you don't believe me, just read the memoirs of one of the world's worst Zionist globalists, David Rockefeller, who admits it. That's straight from the horse's mouth. So the lesson of today's gospel, the first lesson, is the truth of Jesus Christ. He is the Messiah and King. And let us hold fast to that truth unto martyrdom, just like James, Celeste, Simeon, and Jude. So I just spoke Catholic truth. There's a question in the Catechism. How does a Catholic sin against faith? Now, we just learned what the faith was. How does a Catholic sin against faith? The answer, Catholic sins against faith by apostasy, heresy, indifferentism, and by taking part in a non-Catholic worship. We used to know this. The bishops, the cardinals, the popes used to teach it. The nuns really used to teach it. We used to know this. It's in the book. You just read the book, the Baltimore Catechism. We used to know this. Why do I still get people saying, can I go to this non-Catholic worship? Don't you know the answer? Why do you have to ask me? Why haven't you been seeking your faith, studying your faith, so that something so simple as this, and it is simple, this is so basic, this is so foundational, everybody should know it. A Catholic sins against faith by apostasy, heresy, indifferentism, and by taking part in non-Catholic worship. Apostasy is a complete abandonment of the Christian faith by those who have been baptized. Now, I'd like to think that Jorge Bergoglio was baptized, and Leo was baptized. Apostasy is worshiping the Pachamama, a pagan idol. That's apostasy. There's some sins that rise to automatic excommunication. That is called late sententiae excommunication. Worshipping the Pachamama, Jorge Bergoglio and Leo excommunicated themselves. You don't need some, see what they say, we need a later decision by another council or by another pope later on or by all the bishops getting together and saying, oh yeah, that's apostasy, you're out of there. No, we don't need that. That is, of course, they would want to say that because then we can't challenge their claim of authority, which they have forfeited through their worship of the Pachamama. We don't need another council to tell us that they're bowing down to the Pachamama meant they're not Catholic anymore. It is a public, literally public, manifest heresy, apostasy. They're not Catholic anymore. Now you say, well, Leo was quite young then. He was younger. How about we say he was old enough to know better? As an ordained person in the Catholic Church of Jesus Christ, old enough to know better. But let's say he plays a, well, I didn't know what I was doing card. As preposterous as that is, we do not have to set aside all rationale when interpreting the behavior of a pope or a bishop or a cardinal. But let's say, just for the sake of argument, we're going to set aside all rational comprehension of the obvious fact that as an ordained priest, he bowed down to the Pachamama. He didn't know what he was doing. Well, guess what? He certainly knew what Jorge Bergoglio was doing when Jorge Bergoglio brought the Pachamama into the Vatican Gardens, had the worship service that looks exactly like he was doing back in South America, and then parades it on the shoulders of bishops and sets it down in front of St. Peter. Leo knew exactly what Jorge Bergoglio was doing, and now he's been in office almost a year. The great apostasy of Bergoglio, and he hasn't repudiated it, he hasn't condemned it, he hasn't corrected the entire Catholic and Christian world about the absolute apostasy and abomination of bringing the idol into the temple of God, into the mother church of all Christianity. He hasn't said boo about it. And then we find out, well, no wonder, because he was doing it too. He apostatized then, and every single day he's in that white cassock. He continues with an apostasy until such time as he repudiates. And frankly, it's too late. It's way too late, Leo. And what about the Abu Dhabi Agreement? Saying all religions basically are, God wills them all. And Bergoglio signs his name to it. Complete public apostasy. You sign your name to a public document that all the world knows about. Complete public apostasy. Has Leo repudiated that? No. Indifferentism means it doesn't matter what you are. You all You're all voices. You're all got your own little way to heaven. And as Barron had the audacity to say, Jesus is just the privileged way. He said some more things just recently, too. And of course, then you've got that, oh, dare we hope. Hell is like an empty place, a lonely place. Nobody goes there. The heresy of von Balthasar, I believe it is. I don't know if you saw the picture. There's Trump with that crazy lady. She's really off the charts crazy when you see her in action. There she is front and center. I feel sorry for President Trump. But got all these other prots standing around having this little praise and worship thing going on. There's Barron standing there. That is indifferentism. It is a sin against the faith. One of which he continues to do. He's been doing it publicly at least since we know about that interview with Ben Shapiro, where he said Jesus is just the privileged way. And of course, Leo, talk about indifferentism. You know that little scene in the Vatican where he has the Jews and the Protestants and the Muslims and the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Orange Bongo Men. Utter and complete sin of indifferentism, sin against faith. And nobody says anything. No cardinals. There's a couple. There are a couple. And Bishop Schneider says things, and so does Bishop Strickland. There's only, though, I mean, look, I can count the names. Mueller. There's another one in Germany who seems to be pretty good against the grain in there. Sarah. Arinze's really good, but he's so old he doesn't say anything anymore as far as I know. Schneider, Athanasius Schneider, and Bishop Strickland. Give me some more names. I'd love to. There's like 4,000 bishops in the world, something like that. 300 in the U.S. alone. Has a single one of them, except for Strickland, called out the apostasy of Bergoglio and the apostasy of Leo. Remember we heard that thing, you got to wait 6 months? You know full well if Cardinal Robert Sarah walked out onto that balcony, and we wouldn't have had to wait 6 months, we'd have been jumping for joy. We got a Catholic again. Wait 6 months. If you have to wait 6 months to find out if he's Catholic, you shouldn't vote for him in the first place. You hear that? If you have to wait 6 months to find out if he's Catholic, well then you shouldn't be voting for him in the first place, because what if he's not? It's staggering. Didn't I say a little bit ago, there's job security with the bishops, because they will be spending the eternity stoking the coals of the fires of hell. Because, why? Because they're leading us all astray. They're leading us away from the faith. They're poisoning us with their own indifferentism, with their own failure to recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread. Which brings us right back to the gospel. People that know Jesus, people that believe in Jesus, people who are faithful followers of Jesus unto martyrdom, red or white, know exactly who's in that tabernacle. And those who do not believe are easy to spot. And as I've always said, all you have to do is watch them or watch the servers. If it's a girl, they're out of there. They shouldn't be up there. If they've got girls going on, it's contrary. They're disobedient. It's contrary to what the church has always taught, contrary to even what JP2 taught. They're disobedient. So right away you know they don't believe. And if the boys are up there walking back and forth, running around like they don't know what's going on in there, it's because they haven't been taught by the priest, because the priest doesn't believe. Because let me tell you, a server comes into my parish, into my chapel, you're going to know that they know. Well, first of all, you know that I wouldn't even have them here if I didn't think they knew. But I would certainly, I don't know if you saw that little guy. He's like 6. He knows. He knows who's in there. So we don't have to ask ourselves, well, how do we know if that priest really believes in the breaking of the bread, it being Jesus? Watch him around the tabernacle. And if he doesn't believe, if he doesn't have the clear indicia of belief, get out. Go find someplace else. Go find SSPX. By the way, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get everybody who really believes into the SSPX, and then they're going to try to excommunicate. Mark my words, they're going to try to excommunicate them. And then say, and this is where the rubber meets the road. This is where the real Catholics, the true faithful Catholics who recognize Jesus in the breaking of the bread, are going to have to make a decision. You need to understand there is a de facto schism in the church as we speak. And this is the right line that is going to divide it. Because those who don't believe are the many. They control the buildings. And they want to get rid of those who do believe. It's going to be the dividing line. And it's coming fast. I kind of wish it was July 2nd, because you want to know, oh yeah, okay, the battle's on, the rage is on, and I know what side of the line I fall on. Let's pray and pray harder and fast for that day, July 1st, and when we will find out who believes and who does not. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti.